The scent of betrayal is sharper than any perfume. For Amelia, it smelled like her husband's expensive Tom Ford cologne, mingled with the cheap cherry blossom perfume her cousin always wore. It was a scent she discovered in her own bed, on sheets she had picked out in the multi-million-dollar penthouse that was supposed to be their sanctuary. She was 6 months pregnant with their miracle baby, the one they had prayed for, cried for, and celebrated. But as she stood in the doorway, the illusion of her perfect life shattered into a million pieces. He wasn't just a cheat. He was a monster. And she didn't just walk away. She vanished, leaving behind nothing but a ghost and a promise of silent revenge. Amelia lived a life most people only read about in glossy magazines. Her husband, Julian Croft, was a titan of industry, a man whose name was synonymous with success in the cutthroat world of international finance. Their home was a sprawling penthouse on the 80th floor of the iconic 157 building in New York City, a glass palace with panoramic views of Central Park that stretched to the horizon. Every morning, she woke up in a bed with sheets of the finest Egyptian cotton, the city's golden hour light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a life meticulously curated for perfection. Julian was charming, devastatingly handsome, and outwardly utterly devoted to her. He showered her with gifts, a vintage Cartier watch 1 week, a surprise trip to the Amalfi Coast the next. He would whisper sweet nothings in her ear, his voice a low, reassuring rumble that always made her feel safe. He called her his North Star, the anchor in his tumultuous world. They were the golden couple, the envy of their elite social circle. Their joy had reached its zenith 6 months ago, when after years of heartbreaking fertility struggles, Amelia discovered she was pregnant. It was a miracle, a precious gift they had both ardently wished for. Julian seemed overjoyed. He had the nursery designed by a famed interior decorator, filled with handcrafted wooden toys and clothes from Bon Point. He would often kneel, pressing his ear to her burgeoning belly, speaking to their unborn son, promising him the world. To Amelia, these moments were proof of their unshakable bond. Her cousin Isabella had been a constant presence in their lives. After a string of bad luck, a lost job, a broken lease, Amelia had persuaded a hesitant Julian to let Isabella stay with them just for a few weeks, until she got back on her feet. Isabella was the wild one, a stark contrast to Amelia's composed grace. Where Amelia was classic Chanel, Isabella was fast fashion and fleeting trends. She was always a little too loud, her laughter a little too forced, her compliments for Julian a little too effusive. Amelia, ever the trusting and kind-hearted soul, dismissed her own fleeting moments of unease. She told herself she was being overly sensitive, perhaps due to the pregnancy hormones. When Isabella would accidentally walk into their bedroom while Julian was dressing or laugh a little too long at his jokes, Amelia would bite back the flicker of irritation. She was family after all, and family in Amelia's world was everything. The day it all came crashing down was a Tuesday. It was their 3rd wedding anniversary. Julian had told her he had an early, unavoidable meeting with international investors, but had promised a lavish dinner at Per Se that evening to celebrate. He'd kissed her goodbye, his hand lingering on her belly, a picture of doting husband and father-to-be. Amelia had a routine prenatal checkup that morning. The doctor's visit was perfect. Their baby boy was healthy and strong. Floating on a cloud of maternal bliss, she decided to surprise Julian at his office with his favorite lunch, a lobster roll from the little place he loved in Soho. She wanted to see the look on his face to share her joy. But when she arrived at Croft Holdings, a gleaming tower of steel and glass in the heart of the financial district, his longtime assistant, a stern but loyal woman named Margaret, looked flustered. "Mrs. Croft, I wasn't expecting you," Margaret stammered, her eyes darting nervously towards the elevator. "Mr. Croft is in a very important meeting. He left strict instructions not to be disturbed." "Oh, it's all right, Margaret," Amelia said with a warm smile, holding up the takeout bag. "I won't be a moment. I just wanted to drop this off for him. He's been working so hard." "Perhaps I can take it to him." Margaret offered a bead of sweat on her temple. Amelia's brow furrowed slightly. Margaret's behavior was uncharacteristically odd. "No, it's fine. I'll just leave it on his desk. He won't even know I was here." Brushing past the flustered assistant, Amelia took the private elevator to the top floor, a keycard Julian had given her, granting her exclusive access. The doors opened to a silent, opulent reception area that led to his private office. The large, imposing oak doors were slightly ajar. She pushed the door open gently, a cheerful surprise on her lips. But the word died in her throat. The scene that unfolded before her was a grotesque tableau of betrayal. The lobster roll fell from her hand, its contents spilling onto the plush, cream-colored carpet. There on the massive mahogany desk, the one where he signed billion-dollar deals, was her husband. And tangled with him, her dress hiked up around her waist, was Isabella. Their heads snapped towards the door, their faces a mask of shock and guilt. Julian's eyes, the same eyes that had looked at her with such adoration just hours before, were wide with panic. Isabella, her lipstick smeared, let out a pathetic whimper, scrambling to pull her dress down. The world tilted on its axis. The air was sucked from Amelia's lungs. The only sound she could hear was a deafening, high-pitched ringing in her ears. She saw the details with a horrifying clarity, the way Isabella's cheap, cherry-scented perfume hung heavy in the air, a sickly sweet stench that made her stomach churn. The way Julian's hand was still tangled in her cousin's hair. The half-empty bottle of champagne on the corner of the desk. Amelia didn't scream. She didn't cry. A strange glacial calm washed over her, freezing the very marrow in her bones. She looked at Julian, her gaze so empty it was terrifying. She saw him not as her husband, but as a stranger, a loathsome creature she didn't recognize. "Amelia, baby, it's not what it looks like." Julian began, his voice hoarse, as he fumbled with his clothes. The cliché was so absurd, so insulting, that a single mirthless laugh escaped her lips. It was a broken sound, sharp and brittle. She didn't spare a glance for her whimpering cousin cowering in the corner. Her focus was solely on the man who had just ripped her world apart. She took in the scene one last time, branding it into her memory. The overturned photos on his desk. Photos of their wedding, of their travels, of her, seemed to mock her. Then, without a single word, she turned around. She didn't stumble. She didn't run. She walked. Her back was ramrod straight, her head held high. Each step was deliberate, measured, taking her further away from the wreckage of her life. She walked past the horrified face of Margaret in the reception area, through the lobby, filled with his employees, and out onto the bustling streets of New York. She walked away without looking back, the ghost of her past life already fading behind her. She had nothing but the clothes on her back and the tiny, innocent life growing inside her. And in that moment of absolute devastation, a spark of something new and fierce ignited within her, the will to survive. The city noise was a dull roar, a chaotic symphony that barely registered. Amelia walked for blocks, her mind a blizzard of white noise and searing images. The city that had once felt like her kingdom now seemed alien and hostile. Every smiling couple, every advertisement for a happy family was a fresh stab to her heart. She found herself standing in front of the New York Public Library, its stone lions, standing sentinel silent witnesses to her world's collapse. She sank onto a cold stone bench, the chill seeping into her bones. The glacial calm that had carried her out of Julian's office began to crack, and a deep, shuddering tremor took over her body. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the sheer depravity of it. Her husband, her cousin, in his office, on their anniversary, while she was at a doctor's appointment for their child. The layers of deceit were suffocating. Her phone began to buzz incessantly in her pocket. Julian flashed on the screen again and again. Dozens of calls. Then the texts started pouring in. "Amelia, please baby, come back. We need to talk." It was a mistake, a stupid, unforgivable mistake. "Let me explain. Isabella means nothing to me. You and the baby are my world. Don't do this, Amelia. Don't throw everything away." Each message was a fresh wave of nausea. He spoke of their life as if it were a misplaced object, something that could be tidied up and put back on the shelf. He didn't understand. He had not just broken a promise. He had incinerated the very foundation of their existence. With trembling fingers, she blocked his number. Then she blocked Isabella's. Her next call was to her older brother Marcus, a quiet, steady presence in her life. He was a history professor at Columbia, a man who lived in a world of books and facts, a world away from the glitz and glamour she had inhabited. "Marcus." Her voice was a fragile whisper, a sound she barely recognized as her own. "Amy." "What's wrong? You sound terrible." The dam broke. Sobs racked her body, great gulping breaths of grief and rage. Between broken sentences, she managed to tell him everything. Marcus listened patiently, his silence a comforting balm. There was no judgment, no "I told you so," though he had never been Julian's biggest fan, always finding him a little too polished, a little too smooth. "Where are you, Amy?" he asked, his voice firm, grounding her. "The library on 5th Avenue. Don't move. I'll be there in 20 minutes. True to his word, Marcus arrived, his familiar, slightly rumpled figure a beacon of safety. He wrapped her in a hug and she buried her face in his tweed jacket, the scent of old paper and pipe tobacco, a comforting anchor to a time before Julian. "We need to get you out of the city," he said, his tone decisive. "He'll look for you at my place first." Amelia nodded numbly. The thought of returning to the penthouse, to their bed, was repulsive. Every object, every memory, was now tainted. She needed to disappear. "There's a legal instrument," Marcus said, his professor's mind already analyzing the situation. "It's called a post-nuptial agreement. Did you ever sign one?" Amelia shook her head. "No, Julian said it was unromantic. He said what was his was mine always." Another lie, another piece of the carefully constructed facade. Good Marcus said, a grim look on his face. "That makes things more complicated for him. But Amy, you need to understand, a man like Julian with his resources, he won't let you go easily. Not because he loves you, but because a messy divorce and a public scandal are bad for his brand. He'll try to control the narrative." They went to a bank where Amelia, to her own surprise, had a private account her late grandmother had set up for her years ago. It wasn't a fortune, not by Julian's standards, but it was enough to start over. She withdrew a substantial amount of cash, a shield for the immediate future. Her next move was a testament to the quiet strength she never knew she possessed. While Marcus waited in a rented car, Amelia, cloaked in a scarf and sunglasses borrowed from a pharmacy, did the unthinkable. She went back. She used her key to enter the service elevator of 157, a route she knew the staff used for deliveries. The penthouse was cavernously silent. A wave of dizziness washed over her as she stepped inside. The air still held a faint, cloying trace of cherry blossom. Her stomach roiled. She moved with a singular purpose, a ghost in her own home. She ignored the designer clothes, the jewel-encrusted handbags, the vault containing millions in jewelry Julian had gifted her. All of it felt like payment for a service, not tokens of love. They were shackles, and she was shedding them. She went to her grandmother's antique jewelry box, a simple, velvet-lined chest. Inside, she took out the pieces that truly mattered, a string of pearls her grandfather had given her grandmother, a sapphire ring that was a family heirloom. These were her history, her lineage untainted by Julian's money. Her final stop was the nursery. She stood in the doorway, her hand protectively on her belly. The soft, neutral colors, the little rocking horse, the mobile of smiling stars, it was a room full of promises now broken. Tears streamed down her face, silent and hot. She allowed herself this one moment of pure, unadulterated grief for the future that had been stolen. Then she took a deep breath, steeling her resolve. She pulled out her phone and took several clear, detailed photos of the room, of every toy, every book, every tiny pair of shoes. It was evidence. Evidence of his supposed devotion. Evidence of the child he had claimed to want so desperately. As she turned to leave, she saw it on the floor, partially kicked under the dresser. A man's silver cufflink, engraved with the initials J.C. It must have fallen off in his haste to get dressed that morning. She picked it up, its cold weight, a solid thing in her palm. It felt symbolic. He was careless. He was arrogant, and his arrogance would be his downfall. She walked out of the penthouse for the last time, leaving the keycard on the marble countertop. She left behind the diamonds, the couture, the art on the walls. She walked away from the life of Amelia Croft. In its place, a new woman was being forged in the fires of betrayal. A woman with nothing to lose and a son to protect. The disappearing act was complete. Phase 2 was about to begin. 3 months passed. Autumn in New York gave way to the biting winds of winter. In a quiet, snow-dusted town in Vermont, nestled amongst pine trees and rolling hills, Amelia was slowly, painstakingly rebuilding her life. She had rented a small, rustic cottage under the name Anna Stone, a tribute to her grandmother's maiden name. The name Amelia Croft, and the woman who answered to it, felt like a character from a novel she'd once read. Her brother Marcus had been her rock. He helped her find the cottage and handled the initial communications, or lack thereof, with Julian's army of lawyers. Their letters, filled with legal jargon and veiled threats, demanded her return, citing her erratic behavior and emotional instability due to her pregnancy. They were trying to build a case against her, to paint her as an unfit mother. But Marcus, with his methodical mind, countered each letter, calmly stating only that his sister was in a safe place, recuperating from a significant trauma, and would not be intimidated. Life in Vermont was a stark contrast to the opulence of Manhattan. There was no room service, no private drivers, no galas to attend. Instead, there were log fires, the crunch of snow under her boots, and the comforting anonymity of a small town where no one knew her name or her history. She spent her days reading, taking long, solitary walks, and preparing for the arrival of her son. The physical act of knitting a tiny blue hat, the yarn soft in her hands, was more therapeutic than any session with the high-priced therapists Julian had once insisted she see. She found a part-time job working remotely for an old college friend, Chloe, who ran a small but successful rare book dealership. Amelia had a degree in art history, a passion she had set aside to play the role of the perfect corporate wife. Now her knowledge of provenance of art of history became her lifeline. She spent hours researching the origins of antique books and manuscripts, losing herself in stories from centuries past. It was quiet, meticulous work that soothed her fractured soul. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose that was entirely her own. Her pregnancy progressed, her belly swelling with the new life that was both her reason for escaping and her hope for the future. She found a local doctor, a kind, middle-aged woman named Dr. Albright, who listened with gentle empathy as Amelia gave her a heavily redacted version of her story. Meanwhile, back in New York, Julian's world was beginning to show cracks around the edges. He had successfully managed to keep the incident out of the tabloids, thanks to a small fortune paid in hush money to a few key office staff, and a carefully crafted story about Amelia needing rest at an exclusive wellness retreat in Switzerland. Isabella had been sent away, packed off to a job in London, conveniently removing her from the picture. But the silence from Amelia was unnerving him. He had expected tears, screaming matches, dramatic scenes. He had expected to be able to use his charm, his money, to smooth things over as he always had. Her complete and total disappearance was a move he hadn't anticipated. It was a rejection, not just of him, but of the power and control he wielded. He hired a team of the best private investigators money could buy. They were discreet, thorough, and utterly ruthless. They scoured flight manifests, tracked credit card usage, and interviewed her estranged friends. But Amelia had been clever. She had paid for everything in cash, created a new identity, and communicated with no one from her past, except Marcus, who used encrypted messaging apps. She had vanished into thin air. The strain was beginning to show. Julian became short-tempered at work. His legendary focus faltered. A major acquisition, he was spearheading a deal with a Japanese tech firm called Hoshino Dynamics, began to face unexpected hurdles. The normally meticulous Julian was missing details, his mind clearly elsewhere. His investors, the lifeblood of his empire, were starting to murmur. The king was distracted, and the sharks were circling. One evening, as Amelia was cataloguing a 19th century edition of Jane Eyre for Chloe's dealership, she stumbled upon something. Tucked within the pages was an old, faded letter. It wasn't part of the book's known history. It was a personal letter, written by a woman to her sister, detailing her heartbreak over a husband's betrayal and her decision to leave him and start anew in America. The parallels were so striking, so poignant, that Amelia felt a shiver run down her spine. The woman wrote of her fear, but also of a burgeoning sense of freedom, of becoming the author of my own tale. The words resonated deep within Amelia. She was no longer just a victim of Julian's story. She was the author of her own. This realization settled in her, a quiet but powerful shift. She was not just hiding. She was growing. A few days later, a package arrived from Marcus. Inside, amongst some books and supplies, was a small, unmarked envelope. Her brother's note simply said, "I think you should see this." Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs as she opened it. Inside were several photographs, grainy, but clear, taken from a distance. They were of Julian. He was leaving a high-end restaurant in Manhattan. But he wasn't alone. On his arm, looking possessively at him, was a woman Amelia had never seen before. She was impossibly chic, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of formidable power. The accompanying note from Marcus's contact read, Julian Croft with Reina Hoshino, CEO of Hoshino Dynamics. The deal is rumored to be in trouble. Looks like he's trying a different kind of negotiation. Amelia stared at the photograph, a cold fury rising within her. It had been less than 4 months. 4 months since he had destroyed their lives, and he was already moving on, using his charm on another powerful woman to secure a business deal. The pain was sharp, but it was quickly overshadowed by something else, a cold, hard clarity. He hadn't loved her. He had acquired her. She was a beautiful object, the perfect accessory for a man of his stature. And when that object was no longer convenient, he was ready to replace it. But the photograph revealed another, more critical piece of information. It showed Julian's weakness. His ambition, his insatiable need for success, was his Achilles' heel. He was predictable. And for the first time, Amelia realized that she was not. She looked down at her belly, feeling the strong, steady kick of her son. He deserved more than a father who saw people as assets to be managed or discarded. He deserved a mother who would fight for him. She picked up her phone and made a call to Chloe, her friend with the book dealership. "Chloe," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I need a favor. You have contacts in the art and antiques world all over, right? Even in Japan." "Of course," Chloe replied, intrigued. "What do you need?" "I need you to find out everything you can about Reina Hoshino." Amelia said the name, tasting like ash in her mouth. Not her business life, her personal life, what she collects, what she loves, what she's passionate about. The phoenix was no longer content to simply rise from the ashes. She was ready to command the flames. The Vermont winter deepened, blanketing the world in a pristine, silent white. But inside Amelia's small cottage, a quiet storm was brewing. Chloe, with her extensive and discreet network, proved to be a formidable ally. Within weeks, she had compiled a detailed dossier on Reina Hoshino that went far beyond what any business journal could provide. Reina was not just a CEO, she was a cultural powerhouse in Japan, a fierce protector of her nation's artistic heritage. She was the sole heir to the Hoshino dynasty, a family that traced its lineage back to the Edo period. But her true passion, the place where her heart lay, was in collecting rare ukiyo-e woodblock prints, specifically the works of the enigmatic 18th century artist Sharaku. According to Chloe's sources, Reina was obsessed with finding a complete set of his actor portraits, a nearly impossible feat, as several were thought to be lost to time. As Amelia read the report, a plan began to form, intricate and audacious. It was a long shot, a gamble of epic proportions, but it was the only weapon she had. Her own past, the one she had so carefully locked away, held the key. Before Julian, before the gilded cage of New York high society, Amelia had been a different person. After graduating with top honors in art history, she hadn't immediately sought a comfortable gallery job. Instead, she had moved to Kyoto, immersing herself in the study of East Asian art restoration under a legendary master, a man known simply as Sensei Ishikawa. For 2 years, she had lived a Spartan life, learning the delicate art of kintsugi, mending broken pottery with gold, and the meticulous, painstaking process of restoring ancient scrolls and prints. It was during this time that she had come into contact with a hidden world of private collectors of art that rarely saw the light of a museum. And through Sensei Ishikawa, she had been granted a private viewing of a collection that belonged to a reclusive old family in the Japanese countryside. In that collection, she had seen it a pristine, unrecorded woodblock print by Sharaku. It was one of the lost actor portraits. The memory was seared into her mind, the vibrant colors, the expressive face, the artist's unique seal. Julian knew she had studied art, but he'd always dismissed it as a cute hobby. He had no idea of the depth of her knowledge or the connections she had made. Her past was a blind spot in his otherwise thorough surveillance of her life. Now that blind spot was about to become his undoing. Amelia's first step was to contact Sensei Ishikawa. It was a risk, as his name could potentially be linked to her, but she used a secure encrypted channel writing in formal Japanese. She didn't reveal her situation, but spoke of a renewed academic interest in Sharaku. She inquired with the utmost respect about the private collection she had viewed years ago. The reply came a week later. The old master remembered her well, his most gifted student with the soul of a poet. He informed her that the elderly owner of the collection had passed away, and his heirs, who had little interest in art, were quietly looking to sell. The Sharaku print was indeed available. The price was astronomical, far beyond the means of Anna Stone. But Amelia had no intention of buying it. She simply needed to control the information of its existence. Her plan had two fronts. The first was aimed at Julian's ego, the second at Reina Hoshino's heart. Using a burner phone and a voice modulator, she made an anonymous call to a notorious financial gossip columnist in New York, a man known for his poison pen and his ability to move markets with a single, well-placed rumor. "I have a tip about the Hoshino Dynamics deal," the distorted voice said. "Julian Croft isn't sealing the deal with his business acumen. He's trying to seduce the CEO. But he's out of his league. Reina Hoshino is a shark and she's about to eat him alive. Sources say she's just playing with him to get better terms, laughing at the charming American behind his back." She knew Julian's pride. He subscribed to all the industry rags, obsessed with his public image. The suggestion that he was being played, that a woman was making a fool of him, would be infuriating. It would make him reckless. The second, more delicate phase involved Reina. Amelia, through one of Chloe's most trusted contacts in the Tokyo art scene, arranged for an anonymous message to be delivered to Miss Hoshino. It was not an offer to sell. It was a whisper, a tantalizing hint. The message simply said, "The lost portrait of Ichikawa Omezo is not lost. It rests in a private collection, and its owners are considering a sale. Proof of its existence can be provided to a serious and discreet potential buyer." It included an email address, an encrypted and untraceable account Amelia had created. The bait was cast. Now she had to wait. The gossip column hit the internet a few days later, and the fallout was immediate. The rumor spread like wildfire through the financial world. Julian was incandescent with rage. The whispers in his own boardroom grew louder. His deal with Hoshino Dynamics, which was already on shaky ground, now seemed to be teetering on the brink of collapse due to his unprofessional conduct. He became obsessed, doubling his efforts to charm Reina to prove the rumors wrong. But his desperation began to show his smooth facade cracking under the pressure. Then an email landed in Amelia's encrypted inbox. The sender was anonymous, but the tone was imperious and direct. "I am an associate of a party interested in the Sharaku print. We require proof." Amelia's heart pounded. It was Reina's camp. She replied with a single image. It was not a photograph of the print itself. That would be too risky. Instead, it was a high-resolution scan of a small, almost imperceptible detail from the corner of the print, a specific fiber in the washi paper that she had noted during her viewing years ago. It was a detail only someone who had seen the genuine article up close would recognize. For added authenticity, she included a digitally overlaid timestamp from that day. It was a ghost in the machine, a digital fingerprint that proved her claim without revealing the whole picture. She was playing a dangerous game. She was a pregnant woman in a remote cottage manipulating two of the most powerful people in the world. But she felt a thrill she hadn't experienced in years. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it was now mixed with a potent cocktail of adrenaline and resolve. A week later, a second email from Rayna's associate arrived. "The proof is intriguing. My principal wishes to know the conditions of a potential sale." Amelia took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. She typed her reply carefully, every word a calculated move in her high-stakes chess game. "The print is not for sale to just anyone. The current owners wish for it to go to a true connoisseur, someone who will cherish it. They are, however, open to a private off-market transfer. But first, they have one condition. They have heard troubling rumors about the business practices of an American associate of yours, a Mr. Julian Croft. They are a traditional family and value honor above all else. They will not entertain any dealings, direct or indirect, with anyone associated with a man of his questionable character. Sever all ties with him, publicly, and then we can discuss the art." She hit send. She had linked the two parts of her plan. She had put Rayna Hoshino in an impossible position, force her to choose between the deal of a lifetime and the art of a lifetime. She had weaponized a centuries-old piece of paper against a billion-dollar corporation. Julian thought he was fighting a business rival and a scorned wife. He had no idea he was actually battling a ghost from the past, an art historian who knew the price of everything and the value of honor. The trap was set. Now all she could do was wait to see if the Queen would take the bait. The silence that followed was deafening. For 2 weeks, Amelia heard nothing. She checked her encrypted email a dozen times a day, her anxiety a knot in her stomach. Had she overplayed her hand? Was her demand too audacious, too unbelievable? The pressure was immense. She was in her final trimester, her body heavy and tired, and the constant stress was taking its toll. Marcus called daily, his worried voice a lifeline across the miles. Meanwhile, the gossip mill in New York was in overdrive. The rumor she had planted had morphed and grown, taking on a life of its own. Anonymous sources were now confirming that the Hoshino deal was dead, a casualty of Julian Croft's hubris. His company's stock took a noticeable dip. Julian, in a desperate attempt at damage control, leaked a statement to the press, vehemently denying any unprofessional conduct and insisting the negotiations were proceeding smoothly. He appeared on a financial news network, his smile stretched a little too tight, his usual confidence ringing hollow. He was bleeding and he knew it, but what he couldn't possibly know was that the hand wielding the knife was the same one he had once adorned with a 10-carat diamond ring. Then one snowy morning, the world shifted. The news broke not through a whisper or a rumor, but like a thunderclap. Hoshino Dynamics released an official public statement. It was cold, concise, and utterly brutal. Hoshino Dynamics has ceased all negotiations with Croft Holdings. After a period of due diligence, we have concluded that the corporate culture and leadership at Croft Holdings do not align with our company's long-held principles of honor and integrity. We will be seeking other partners for our North American expansion. The phrase honor and integrity was a dagger twisted with surgical precision. It didn't just kill the deal, it assassinated Julian's character on a global stage. The financial world was stunned. No one walked away from a deal this big, this publicly, this scathingly. Amelia saw the news on her laptop and felt a dizzying mix of triumph and terror. It had worked. Her ghost story, her whisper of a lost piece of art, had brought a titan to his knees. Reina Hoshino, the formidable queen of industry, had made her move. She had chosen the art. In New York, Julian Croft's world imploded. His phone rang off the hook with calls from furious investors, board members, and journalists. The stock plummeted, wiping hundreds of millions off the company's valuation in a single day. He was a pariah. The man who had prided himself on control had lost it completely. His rage, unable to find its true target, turned inward and then outward, seeking a scapegoat. He fired Margaret, his loyal assistant of 15 years, accusing her of leaking information. He screamed at his legal team, and in a fit of alcohol-fueled paranoia, his mind finally went where it should have gone months ago. Amelia. This wasn't just bad luck. This was sabotage. This was personal. The timing, the language of the press release, honor, it all pointed to a deliberate, calculated attack. He had grossly underestimated her. He had seen a docile, heartbroken creature, and in her place stood a brilliant, vengeful strategist. He redoubled his efforts to find her no longer caring about discretion. He unleashed his private investigators with a new ferocity, a blank check and a single command: find her. He needed to confront her, to control her, to silence her before she could do any more damage. A few days after the Hoshino announcement, an email landed in Amelia's secure inbox. It was from Reina's associate. "The condition has been met. My principal is now ready to discuss the acquisition." Amelia's hands trembled as she typed her response. She proposed a method of communication and verification that was worthy of a spy novel involving a neutral third-party art appraiser in Geneva and a series of coded messages sent through an online chess forum. It was designed to be slow, deliberate, and above all, safe. She needed to buy herself more time. Her due date was just weeks away. Reina, clearly a woman who appreciated a well-played game, agreed to the terms. The intricate dance began, Amelia posing as an intermediary for the reclusive owners, slowly fed Reina's camp details about the print, each one verifiable by the expert in Geneva, but never revealing enough to pinpoint its location. It was during this period that the next twist occurred, one Amelia had not anticipated. A manila envelope with no return address arrived at her cottage. Her blood ran cold, thinking Julian's investigators had found her. But the postmark was from London. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small memory stick. The letter was from Isabella. Her handwriting was a shaky scrawl, a stark contrast to her usual flamboyant script. "Amelia, I know you will never forgive me, and I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that it wasn't just about what you think. Julian is a monster, but not just because he cheats. He's a criminal. Before he sent me away, I was scared. He threatened me. I took something from his home office computer as insurance. I don't know what it all means, but I know it's bad. It's offshore accounts, shell corporations' names I don't recognize. He is not the man anyone thinks he is. This is all I can do to try and make things right. Be careful. He's more dangerous than you can imagine." With a deep sense of dread, Amelia inserted the memory stick into her laptop. It contained dozens of files, spreadsheets, bank statements from places like the Cayman Islands and Liechtenstein, and encrypted documents. She didn't understand the complex financial jargon, but she understood the pattern. It looked like a massive money laundering scheme. Julian wasn't just a titan of finance. He was a master criminal using his legitimate business as a front for a far darker enterprise. The Hoshino deal wasn't just about expansion. It was likely about laundering a new massive influx of dirty money. The revelation changed everything. This was no longer a story of infidelity and revenge. She had stumbled into something far more dangerous. Julian wouldn't just be angry if he found her. He would be desperate. A man with this much to hide would stop at nothing to protect his secrets. Her son wasn't just the child of a cheating husband, but the heir to a criminal empire. The stakes had been raised to an entirely new level. Her gambit with Raina had been about justice. Now it was about survival. She had to expose him completely and irrevocably, not just for what he did to her, but for whatever crimes he had committed. She looked at the files, then at the chess game playing out on her screen with Raina's team. She had the queen on her side, and now a memory stick full of dynamite from a disgraced knave. All the pieces were in place. It was time to plan the checkmate. The birth of her son, whom she named Ethan, meaning strong and enduring, was both an anchor and a catalyst. Holding him in her arms in the quiet Vermont hospital, Amelia felt a primal surge of protective love, so fierce it eclipsed all her fear. Ethan was her future, a future she would cleanse of Julian Croft's toxic legacy. The time for hiding was over. The time for a final decisive confrontation had come. Her plan for the endgame was as intricate and layered as the schemes Julian himself had woven. It required perfect timing, unwavering nerve, and the coordinated efforts of her unlikely allies. Her first move was with Raina Hoshino. Through their clandestine channels, Amelia, still the anonymous intermediary, made her final offer regarding the Sharaku print. The owners have been deeply impressed by your commitment to artistic integrity. They no longer wish to sell the print. Instead, they wish to gift it to you under one final condition, that you are the one to personally and publicly expose the full extent of Julian Croft's financial crimes. She attached a single heavily encrypted file from Isabella's memory stick, a damning spreadsheet showing a clear trail of money flowing from a known criminal organization into a shell corporation owned by Croft Holdings. It was the smoking gun. She was giving Raina not just the motivation, the print, but the ammunition to do what needed to be done. It was a brilliant move. A foreign national of Raina's stature exposing him would attract international attention and bypass any corrupt officials Julian might have in his pocket in the US. To Raina, it was the ultimate power play. She would not only acquire the priceless artwork that had obsessed her for years, but would also be seen as a global champion of corporate ethics, cementing her reputation as she expanded into a new market. It was an offer she couldn't refuse. Amelia's second move was to orchestrate the confrontation. She knew Julian's investigators were closing in. She could feel their presence, a tightening net. So she decided to choose the battlefield. She sent one final, untraceable message not to Julian, but to Marcus. The nest is empty. Time for the final act. The plaza. Presidential suite. 48 hours. She knew Julian had likely compromised her brother's communications and would intercept the message. It was a deliberate lure. The Plaza Hotel, the scene of so many of their early happy dates, was the perfect poetic location for his downfall. Her third move was her bravest. She called the one person she knew Julian feared and respected in the legal world, the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, a formidable prosecutor named David Chen, whom Julian had often mentioned with a mix of professional admiration and caution. Posing as a confidential informant, she laid out the broad strokes of the case, promising irrefutable evidence that would be delivered by an unimpeachable source, Reina Hoshino, within 48 hours. She gave him the what, the when, and the where. The day of the confrontation was surreal. Amelia checked into the presidential suite at the plaza, a place that screamed of the wealth she now despised. She was no longer the timid wife. She was calm, centered, a general before a battle. Ethan was safe with Chloe miles away, shielded from the impending fallout. Marcus was waiting in the wings, ready to act as her legal counsel once the dust settled. At precisely 8:00 p.m., there was a knock on the door. Julian stood there, flanked by two imposing men who were clearly not his usual security. His face was a thunderous mask of rage. The charm was gone, replaced by a cold reptilian fury. "So the little mouse decided to come out of her hole," he sneered, striding into the room. "Did you really think you could hide from me? Did you think you could ruin me and get away with it?" Amelia stood by the grand fireplace, a picture of serene composure. "It's over, Julian." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Over. It's just beginning. You have no idea what you've done. You've signed your own death warrant." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You are going to sign a statement saying you've been suffering from postpartum psychosis, that you fabricated everything. You will give me back my son, and you will disappear. For good this time." "Your son?" Amelia's voice was laced with ice. "You don't have a son. You have a liability, a loose end, just like me, just like Isabella, just like Reina Hoshino. We're all just pieces on your board, aren't we?" As she spoke, the large television screen in the suite flickered to life. It was a live feed from a press conference in Tokyo. Reina Hoshino stood at a podium, her face a mask of cold fury. "Today, I am announcing that Hoshino Dynamics has provided international law enforcement agencies with evidence of a significant multi-year money laundering operation masterminded by American CEO Julian Croft," she announced in crisp English. Julian's face went white. He stared at the screen, his bravado evaporating. On the screen, Reina's assistant held up documents, the same documents from Isabella's memory stick. "Furthermore," Reina continued, "as a gesture of our commitment to restoring honor to the world of art and business, I am humbled to announce the recovery of a long-lost national treasure." The screen behind her changed, showing a stunning high-definition image of the Sharaku print. This masterpiece, which was being held hostage by criminal elements associated with Mr. Croft, has been returned to the people of Japan. It was a masterstroke of narrative. Reina had not only exposed him, but had also woven the art into the story, painting Julian as not just a white-collar criminal, but a cultural vandal. Julian stumbled backward, his eyes wide with disbelief. "How? You underestimated us all, Julian," Amelia said softly. "You saw a lovesick wife, a pathetic cousin, a foreign businesswoman. You never saw the women who were tired of being your pawns." At that precise moment, the doors to the suite burst open. It wasn't Julian's thugs. It was a team of FBI agents, led by a grim-faced David Chen. "Julian Croft," Chen announced, his voice booming in the suddenly silent room. "You are under arrest for conspiracy wire fraud and money laundering." Julian stared from the agents to Amelia, his face a grotesque mixture of hatred and defeat. The master of the universe, cornered in a hotel suite, his empire crumbling on live television. As the agents cuffed him, his eyes locked on Amelia's one last time. There was no remorse, only pure, unadulterated venom. Amelia didn't flinch. She simply held his gaze, a testament to the woman he had failed to see. She had not only walked away without looking back, she had burned the whole corrupt kingdom to the ground behind her. In the end, it wasn't about the money, the betrayal, or even the revenge. It was about a woman reclaiming her own story. Amelia didn't just walk away from a cheating husband. She dismantled a criminal empire with intelligence, courage, and the help of an unlikely sisterhood forged in the fires of his deceit. She proved that true strength isn't about the life you're given, but the one you have the courage to build for yourself brick by painful brick, while his pregnant wife cried at home. The Millionaire posted vacation. Pics with his mistress. Then came the audit. They say that beneath every polished photograph lies a truth we dare not expose. Meet Mark Rutherford, a millionaire who appeared to have it all, a sprawling empire, gleaming sports cars and high society connections from New York to Monaco. His social media profiles flaunted sun-kissed getaways with an alluring woman at his side, but the world didn't know the tears he left behind. At home, Mark's pregnant wife, Angela, anxiously awaited his return, watching in despair as he posted glamorous vacation photos with his secret mistress. Little did he realize that a brutal audit loomed on the horizon, poised to shatter his perfect facade. At first glance, the life of Mark Rutherford looked like a fairy tale. Hailing from a modest neighborhood in upstate New York, Mark had ascended the social and financial ladder at breathtaking speed. He had rebranded himself into a savvy businessman who moved effortlessly in circles filled with CEOs, philanthropists and venture capitalists from Manhattan. Guests at his lavish parties would whisper about Mark's meteoric rise, debating whether his success was the product of ruthless cunning, uncanny luck, or possibly both. His wife, Angela Rutherford, had grown up in an entirely different environment, sunlit farmland just outside Buffalo, A. Kind and gentle soul. Angela had fallen for Mark's charm when they were young. In those early years, he possessed a rare combination of drive and tenderness. She could still recall the day he proposed an intimate picnic near a serene lake where he vowed to cherish her forever. Although the lake was hardly a glamorous setting, the genuine emotion in Mark's eyes made every breeze and sunbeam feel like divine blessings upon their union. Their first few years of marriage were marked by humble dreams and long conversations about building a stable future. Angela had a warm smile and an unyielding belief in Mark's potential. She supported him when he launched his first company, a small tech startup, funded by meager savings and the generosity of a few distant relatives. She listened patiently to his late-night brainstorming sessions and scribbled business plans on napkins. She believed wholeheartedly in the man who had once promised her that no matter how high he soared, he would never leave her side. But success, as it often does, transformed Mark. The better the company did, the more Mark's life became a whirlwind of red carpet galas, midnight phone calls with overseas clients, and secretive deals that always seemed to happen behind closed doors. Angela initially chalked it up to the demands of business. He was forging connections, building a network, ensuring they would never again fret about money. But as Mark's taste for luxury intensified, so did the gap between them. No longer content with a quiet dinner at home, he began to crave expensive restaurants, dinners with powerful executives, and weekends aboard yachts docked in exclusive marinas. During this swift transition from middle-class comfort to extravagant wealth, Angela sometimes felt like a relic of Mark's past. She struggled to navigate the new social circles he so eagerly embraced. It wasn't that Angela lacked sophistication, she simply had a different set of values. Surrounded by glitzy soirees and endless champagne flutes, Angela found herself quietly pining for their old lives, where a single bouquet of daisies and an evening stroll could ignite her spirit More than any five-star event, when Angela discovered she was pregnant, she hoped it might rekindle the warmth and closeness they once shared. She dreamed of Mark's strong arms wrapped around her, whispering excited plans for a nursery. Yet from the very first conversation, she sensed his excitement was tainted. Instead of wholeheartedly celebrating her news, he mumbled something about how a baby might complicate ongoing deals. She tried to reassure him that they would navigate parenthood just like any other challenge, united by love and commitment. But the more her belly grew, the more Mark seemed to drift. Business expansions, urgent calls from Hong Kong, clandestine texts that he refused to show her. These all took precedence. Angela, in the softness of her heart, convinced herself that Mark was merely stressed. He was under intense pressure, or so he said. If anything, it was a testament to how dedicated he was to providing a secure life for their future child. She held on to that thought like a lifeline, refusing to consider more troubling possibilities. Meanwhile, Mark privately relished his newfound status among the mega-rich. He had formed partnerships with influential names. One such person was Richard Caldwell, a private equity mogul known for his hush-hush real estate acquisitions from Manhattan to Los Angeles. Caldwell quickly became more than just a business contact. He was also Mark's mentor in the art of living lavishly, constantly reminding him, wealth is not just about what you own. It's about how you display it. Between the constant swirl of business negotiations and late-night private gatherings at Caldwell's penthouse, Mark found himself on a slippery slope of moral compromises. It wasn't just about ignoring Angela. He was now drawn to a lifestyle where excess blurred ethical lines, and where loyalty even to one's spouse became just another disposable commodity. In the back of his mind, Mark rationalized everything. He was simply seizing opportunities that his younger self could only dream about. After all, once the dust settled, he'd settle down, he promised himself. He would eventually focus on family life. Among the wave of new faces entering Mark's life was Cassie Delgado, a striking woman with flowing auburn hair who exuded confidence and ambition. She first appeared on the scene as a marketing consultant recommended by one of Mark's investors. Their initial meeting took place in a sleek Manhattan boardroom, and Cassie left a powerful impression. She had a knack for reading a room, understanding its power dynamics, and adjusting her tone to sway the conversation in her favor. Mark watched, half amazed and half envious, as she negotiated cutting-edge promotional deals with an ease and flair that rivaled his own. She was more than an adept negotiator. Her presence was magnetic. Cassie was the kind of woman who seemed to invite confessions and temptations, her laughter hinting at secrets waiting to be uncovered. When Mark discovered she came from a modest background much like his, he felt an immediate sense of kinship. She too had clawed her way up from near obscurity. They bonded over shared stories of once living paycheck to paycheck, mocking the condescending attitudes they endured from privileged elites. And yet, while Angela's gentle innocence had once captivated Mark, Cassie's fierceness both inspired and intimidated him. On the surface, they formed a natural professional alliance, two driven personalities with matching hunger for wealth and influence. Beneath that veneer, however, a different chemistry was building. Mutual admiration soon morphed into flirtatious texts, then secret coffee dates under the guise of client meetings. Cassie was shrewd enough to know exactly what she wanted. She was not a naive romantic easily carried away by Mark's charms. She calculated every advantage that could be gained from their liaison. Whenever Mark talked about his personal life, Cassie would gently place a hand on his shoulder, tilt her head with empathy, and convince him that she alone understood his pressures. At first, it was subtle comfort during stressful work situations, but as time wore on, those stolen moments felt like portals to an alternate reality, where Mark wasn't obligated to be the doting husband or expectant father. He was free to indulge in Cassie's wiles, free to forget that Angela existed at home, softly crying herself to sleep. Each clandestine meeting fueled an adrenaline rush, unlike anything Mark had felt before. One evening, Cassie invited him to a high-end fashion show after-party, an event teeming with celebrities and socialites. Mark reasoned it was good for networking, so he attended in the dimly lit VIP lounge amid pulsing music and expensive champagne. Mark kissed Cassie for the first time. Angela was thousands of miles away in Buffalo for a prenatal checkup, but even if she had been in the same city, Mark doubted the outcome would have changed. Cassie was intoxicating. For a while, their affair was their best-kept secret. Mark rationalized that no real harm was done. He was merely satisfying a physical and emotional itch. Business thrived, and Mark promised himself that once the baby arrived, he would end it. He pictured a scenario in which he'd gracefully cut ties with Cassie, quietly return to Angela, and no one would ever know. But the more he tried to imagine an exit strategy, the deeper he sank into Cassie's enticements. Before long, Cassie began to sense Mark's warring guilt. She was nobody's fool. She noticed the anxious tone in his voice after each rendezvous and spotted the wedding ring he rarely took off. Yet she never pushed for a more official status. She didn't need to. Her hold over him was strong enough, and she reaped benefits as his preferred consultant, winning her lucrative contracts. Unbeknownst to Mark, Cassie also had connections in other circles. She heard whispers of the IRS investigating not just Mark's businesses, but also Caldwell's. These tidbits floated around black tie galas and hush-hush dinners. She gleaned from passing remarks how Mark's deals sometimes skirted the edges of legality. It was all speculation, but she kept it stored in the back of her mind should she ever need an ace up her sleeve. Angela, meanwhile, was growing more anxious by the day. Mark's excuses for his long absences piled up crucial deals, hectic travel schedules, emergency client meetings at odd hours. At times, Angela tried to voice her concerns, but Mark always brushed them off with dismissive gestures, telling her not to stress herself out during the pregnancy. Each time she felt a nagging sense that something was deeply amiss, but she forced herself to believe Mark's explanations. After all, how could the father of her unborn child be unfaithful? He was the man who once sobbed tears of joy when she agreed to marry him. Yet on nights when the loneliness grew unbearable, Angela couldn't help scrolling through Mark's social media, analyzing every new post or tagged photo like a detective on the verge of an explosive revelation. She couldn't place it exactly, but she sensed that the radiant smile on Mark's face in those pictures wasn't the same one he reserved for her or once had. Something vital had changed. It was as if he had found a new source of excitement, leaving Angela feeling more invisible with each passing day. Angela had no idea that an even bigger betrayal was about to blow their world apart, that her husband's business partner was really a mistress, and neither Mark nor Cassie suspected that the glittering tapestry of their covert romance was about to be torn asunder by forces far beyond their control. After all, if there's one thing life teaches us, it's that no secret can stay hidden forever, and that a reckoning is inevitable when you've built your castle on shifting sand. At home, each day of Angela's pregnancy crawled by like a slow-moving storm cloud. She had hoped that her growing belly would be a beacon of joy for both her and Mark, proof that love could endure beyond the manic hustle of corporate life. Instead, she found herself more alone than ever. Friends suggested prenatal yoga, childbirth classes, or baby shower plans, but Angela found it hard to join in the celebrations. How could she rejoice when Mark seemed only half present? Angela's symptoms, morning sickness, mood swings, and constant fatigue were magnified by emotional distress. Nights brought panic attacks that left her trembling under the covers, her tears dampening the pillow. Where was the partner who had once held her tight, reminding her that everything would be okay? Where was the man who had promised to love her in sickness and in health? When she tried to reach out, the phone calls went unanswered or were hurriedly cut short. Mark's texts, once affectionate, devolved into bullet points of half-hearted excuses. He reassured her, big project in Hong Kong, investors in town, busy with conference calls, will be home soon. Angela yearned to believe these promises, but as the weeks went on, she could sense the widening gap. She sought solace in memories of happier times, the first months of their marriage, in a small but cozy apartment, the simple act of cooking dinner together, laughing at inside jokes no one else could understand. Now the mansion they called home felt like an empty museum, its gilded ornaments and plush furniture mocking her loneliness. The house staff, housekeeper, chef, and driver tried to care for Angela, but their presence only highlighted Mark's absence. One evening, determined to bring back a shred of normalcy, Angela arranged a special dinner complete with soft candlelight and her favorite homemade lasagna. She spent hours meticulously preparing each ingredient, all in hopes that Mark would come home and remember the love they once shared. She waited, her heart pounding at each passing minute. Midnight came and went, and by 1 a.m, the lasagna was cold and her tears were hot on her cheeks. Mark never walked through the door. Days blurred together in a monotonous cycle of doctor's visits and heartbreak. Angela's obstetrician, Dr. Viola Bancroft, gently advised her to minimize stress, emphasizing how harmful chronic anxiety could be for both mother and baby. Angela tried. She practiced deep breathing exercises, wrote in a journal, and consulted with a pregnancy counselor. In private moments, she'd place her hand on her belly, speaking softly to the life growing within her. She promised her unborn child that no matter what, they would be loved. Even if Mark never returned to them in the way he once was, Angela resolved to be strong. But that resolve wavered whenever Angela spotted something suspicious online. Mark's social media, once a tame collection of business achievements and philanthropic engagements, had transformed into a gallery of exotic beaches, poolside cocktails, and glamorous parties. And he wasn't alone in these photos. A beautiful red-haired woman, sometimes tagged as Cassie Delgado, appeared in the background, or sometimes right by Mark's side. The two looked far too comfortable, far too close. Angela tried to reason with herself that maybe it was innocent, a professional associate or a friend. Yet the intimacy in their smiles felt like a dagger in Angela's heart. She dared not question Mark about it directly. She feared the answers she might get, or worse, the way he might dismiss her concerns altogether. Still, the seed of suspicion grew fueled by late-night social media stalking and the silent agony of her intuition. Each time Angela tried to bring up Cassie's name, Mark would brush it off, repeating lines like, "She's a valuable consultant," or "We're finalizing a huge deal, stop worrying." Angela's internal turmoil escalated until one night she broke down completely. She found herself curled up on the floor of the master bedroom, phone clutched in her shaking hand, sobbing uncontrollably. The images of Mark's apparent happiness with this other woman tormented her. Her growing stomach only served as a painful reminder that while her body prepared for motherhood, Mark seemed to be living a carefree, childless existence. Amid her tears, Angela realized something she was witnessing. Mark's transformation into the kind of man he once despised, someone who put material success and fleeting pleasures above everything else, including loyalty and love. The questions piled up. Could she trust him anymore? Would he even want to be part of the baby's life? And what if these business trips were mere covers for wild vacations with Cassie? Quietly, Angela decided that if Mark refused to come home to her, she would seek the truth on her own terms. She began to imagine confronting him directly, to see his reaction, to see if he'd lie to her face. For Angela, the days of silent suffering might soon come to an end. But before she could fully plan her confrontation, fate began its own countdown. Forces were converging behind the scenes, angry investors, suspicious auditors, and the unstoppable momentum of gossip that swirled through the social circles Mark desperately tried to impress. Unaware of the storm that lay ahead, Angela continued to cling to one fragile hope that Mark would redeem himself before it was too late. Beachfront villas, crystal blue waters, and indulgent spa treatments at world-class resorts. This was Mark's new normal whenever he traveled with Cassie. The pair found endless excuses to combine work trips with scenic getaways, posting tastefully curated snapshots on social media. In each photo, Mark radiated a carefree smile, as if the sum of his worries amounted to nothing more significant than choosing the next cocktail to sip. Cassie orchestrated every shot, understanding the power of optics. She took great care to capture Mark against a backdrop of towering palm trees, their fronds swaying above him like a king's canopy. In some photos, Cassie stood at the edge of the frame, an enigmatic figure sipping champagne. The images ignited social media buzz and gossip in their swanky circles. Who is that stunning redhead with Mark Rutherford? Is she his new business partner or something more? The speculation only added to the thrilling aura of their forbidden escapade. For Mark, the vacation pics served a dual purpose. First, they fed his ego. After years of hustling to get recognized by society's upper echelons, he relished every like, comment, and message praising his amazing life. Second, they were a form of self-deception. If he convinced the world he was happy, maybe he could stifle the nagging guilt in his conscience. Guilt about leaving Angela alone at home, pregnant and distraught. Of course, Mark conveniently never mentioned Angela in these posts, nor did he reveal the existence of an unborn child. He rationalized that it was a private matter, not suited for public consumption. When friends and acquaintances inquired about Angela, he'd respond with vague statements. Oh, she's busy preparing for the baby, or traveling isn't safe for her right now. He avoided deeper questions at all costs. The last thing he wanted was an unscripted interview on how his personal life was unraveling. Cassie, meanwhile, reveled in her rising social profile. She found herself tagged in photos by influencers and minor celebrities who recognized Mark's wealth and Cassie's clever marketing strategies. Doors to exclusive events opened, wider brunch invitations from industry heavyweights rolled in. Through all this, Cassie remained calculated. She encouraged Mark to spend more lavishly to cultivate a public image as a worldly magnate on the verge of major global deals. That meant private jets instead of first-class commercial flights, dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, and suites in the most luxurious hotels. Mark complied, though each charge made his accountants and financial managers increasingly anxious. None of this extravagance occurred without cost. Mark's fluid capital was tied up in high-risk ventures. Liquidity was tighter than appearances suggested. He juggled lines of credit and questionable transactions, leaning heavily on Caldwell's counsel. Caldwell too urged Mark to keep the momentum of success going. Fake it till you make it was essentially their unspoken mantra. As long as public perception remained, stellar deals would keep flowing, and the heavy interest rates and balloon payments could be pushed further into the future. But cracks in the glossy surface began to form. On a particular getaway in Fiji, Mark received a barrage of frantic texts from his CFO. Financial regulators were poking around. Some suspicious wire transfers were flagged. Panicked investors were demanding clarifications on how Mark's so-called expansions aligned with his sudden personal spending. Mark tried to brush it off, determined not to let anything ruin his beach holiday with Cassie. He reasoned that this was just a minor hiccup. Nothing a few well-placed phone calls and quick financial maneuvers couldn't fix Cassie, ever attuned to the slightest shift in Mark's mood, pressed him for details. He only offered vague reassurances about routine audits and overzealous inspectors. This was the first time she witnessed a real worry flicker behind Mark's confident facade. Sensing the potential threat to her cushy arrangement, Cassie tried to downplay it, coaxing him back into the carefree zone. They snapped more radiant selfies on the shore, hoping to drown out reality with digital illusions. Unbeknownst to them, Angela was scrolling through these very pictures. At that moment, tears streaming down her cheeks as she recognized the hotel's name from a travel magazine. The woman in Mark's arms wasn't just a business partner. No professional consultant gazed at a client with such intimate adoration. Angela felt a sharp ache in her chest as she realized how little Mark cared about hiding his betrayal. The audacity of his posts was almost surreal. Desperation clawed at Angela's insides. Perhaps confronting him through a phone call where she could hear his voice break if he lied was her best shot at forcing the truth. Gathering her nerve, she dialed Mark's number. No answer. She tried again and again, only to be met with voicemail. Anger flared up in her, a rage she'd never felt before. This was no longer a series of unfortunate misunderstandings or too busy at work moments. This was blatant humiliation. In the background, the swirl of an IRS investigation was growing stronger. Anonymous tips and suspicious transaction reports had caught the attention of forensic accountants who were beginning to follow the money trail. The timing of Mark's lavish travels raised red flags. Why, they wondered, would a businessman under such financial scrutiny broadcast opulent holidays across social media? Didn't he realize that auditors often examine lifestyle displays as part of their case? For Mark, ignorance felt like bliss. The more pictures he posted, the less real his looming problems seemed. Yet reality was closing in fast. The golden sand and azure waves might have served as a temporary stage for his fabricated paradise, but the tides were about to shift. And when they did, they'd wash away more than just footprints in the sand. While Mark and Cassie soaked in, the Fiji Sun agents at the Internal Revenue Service's Manhattan branch started piecing together fragments of an intricate puzzle. Spearheading the investigation was a meticulous auditor named Mallory Finch, reputed for her tenacity and keen ability to spot inconsistencies in vast financial records. Mallory had received a discreet tip about Mark Rutherford's questionable income streams, and once she opened his file, she discovered an alarming mismatch between his reported earnings and the lifestyle he flaunted. Mallory was never one to jump to conclusions, but the more she dug, the more anomalies she found. A sudden influx of capital, suspiciously timed with Mark's social media updates of private jet getaways, a pattern of shell companies popping up in multiple states, then vanishing without clear financial statements, offshore accounts vaguely tied to Mark's business, some of which contained substantial deposits from individuals flagged for previous tax evasion. These pieces raised her eyebrows and Mallory suspected this investigation could balloon into something far larger than a mere tax discrepancy. Her next step involved contacting individuals who might share insights on Mark's dealings. One name that kept surfacing was Richard Caldwell, the private equity mogul rumored to have a hand in Mark's expansions. Caldwell himself was already under IRS scrutiny for unrelated properties in Florida and the Carolinas. If Caldwell and Mark were pooling resources in some illicit scheme, it could spell big headlines. Mallory prepared requests for bank statements, wire transfers, credit card expenditures, anything that would illustrate the true scope of Mark's financial empire. At the same time, Mark's CFO, Brian Cummings, was drowning in chaos. As soon as he noticed the heightened interest from regulatory authorities, Brian tried to warn Mark, but each call went unanswered, each email unreturned. Panic thrummed in Brian's chest. The entire finance department was on edge, especially after receiving official requests from the IRS for detailed financial records. Paper trails that Mark had insisted be handled discreetly were now fair game. If Mark didn't address these issues promptly, the meltdown would be inevitable. Behind the scenes, Caldwell played it cool. In public, he would toast Mark as a brilliant entrepreneur and encourage him to keep up appearances. In private, Caldwell had already started distancing himself, transferring assets, and instructing his own legal team to prepare for inquiries. If the walls caved in, Caldwell intended to emerge with minimal damage, leaving Mark to shoulder the brunt of the consequences. Word of the looming audit spread quietly through Manhattan's financial circles. Bankers and lawyers connected to Mark had hushed luncheons, speculating about the magnitude of his troubles. Some predicted he'd face a heavy fine at best, or a full-scale criminal investigation. At worst, a few even took delight in the prospect of Mark's downfall, viewing it as an inevitable collapse for a man who rose too fast, spent too freely, and believed himself untouchable. Meanwhile, Angela was oblivious to the complexities of Mark's finances. Her world was confined to heartbreak and concern over her unborn child. She knew Mark must be in trouble. The abrupt changes in his behavior, the money he threw around so casually, the hush-hush deals he once mentioned but refused to elaborate upon. Yet she couldn't fathom the depth of the scandal brewing. Each day her anxiety deepened, a feeling that something catastrophic was hovering just out of sight. It all came to a head when Angela received a strange phone call from one of Mark's junior associates, a woman named Kara Hoffman. Although Kara didn't divulge specifics, she sounded panicked. "Angela, I don't know if you're aware, but there are investigations going on. Things look bad." Angela's heart pounded in her ears as Kara's words spilled over the line. "We're being asked for documents, receipts. I think Mark's in serious trouble. And look, this might not be my place, but I think you should know Mark's not who he used to be." Angela thanked Kara, her mind spiraling with questions. What exactly were they investigating? Had Mark committed fraud? Was he actually bankrupt and hiding the truth? The uncertainties gnawed at her. She ended the call feeling more determined than ever to confront Mark. She realized that her heartbreak over his possible affair was only one part of a bigger, uglier picture. If he was entangled in financial crimes, her unborn child's future would be at stake too. In Fiji, Mark was irritated to see a slew of missed calls from Brian and a cryptic text from Caldwell. "We need to talk ASAP." He tried to keep his calm exterior, but Cassie noticed the worry lines etched across his brow. Over an expensive bottle of wine at a cliffside restaurant, Mark finally admitted to her that the IRS might be launching a routine audit, but insisted it was nothing major. Cassie, who had heard different rumors from her insider network, suspected it was more serious than Mark let on. Yet she feigned reassurance, drawing Mark into a languid embrace. They'd handle it together, she cooed. They were unstoppable when united. That night, however, Cassie stepped outside onto the moonlit beach and placed a phone call to one of her closest confidants, an attorney who specialized in corporate law. Just in case she wanted to know her rights and potential liabilities, if Mark went down, Cassie had no intention of going down with him. Far away from that tranquil beach, Mallory Finch and her team worked late hours, scanning through reams of documents. Something big was surfacing, a web of shell companies, unaccounted funds, and potential tax evasion, so blatant it nearly dared the authorities to react. As she compiled her findings, Mallory sensed a storm about to erupt. The wealthy always believed they could outrun the law, but in her experience, hubris was their undoing. She gave a final glance at Mark's social media feed, scoffing at the gall of a man who flaunted paradise while standing at the brink of a scandal. Angela stood at the top of the grand staircase, the late afternoon sun illuminating her pregnant silhouette as she awaited Mark's return. She had summoned every last shred of courage to do what she should have done weeks ago, demand answers face to face. The house staff, sensing the tension, made themselves scarce. Rarely did Angela request the entire household's presence be minimal, but now she needed privacy. She needed space to unleash her anguish without an audience. Finally, Mark entered, dragging a suitcase behind him. He looked exhausted, yet still wore that forced confidence he had perfected in boardrooms. Angela's throat constricted at the sight of him. This was the man she'd once adored, now nearly a stranger. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed anger and hurt. Mark's immediate instinct was to deflect Angela. "I've just come off a long flight. Can we do this later?" He began massaging his temples dramatically, but Angela stood firm, crossing her arms protectively over her belly. "No, now." A tense silence fell between them in the marble-floored foyer. Angela had rehearsed this confrontation dozens of times in her head, but the actual moment felt surreal. She started with the obvious, his social media posts. She demanded to know who the woman was, whether Cassie Delgado was truly just a consultant. Mark tried to dismiss it as exaggerated rumors describing Cassie as a business partner who happened to be a close friend. Yet Angela's tears and fury dissolved any illusions. She raged at him for abandoning her during the pregnancy, for flaunting a lavish lifestyle, while she dealt with swollen ankles, hormonal surges, and sleepless nights alone. Her voice rose with each accusation. She brandished printouts of Mark's social media pictures, her hands shaking violently. "You think I'm stupid? Look at how she stares at you in these pictures." Her tears glimmered in the light, but her voice stayed sharp, revealing a hidden steeliness that Mark was unprepared for. Cornered Mark tried to justify himself. He mumbled about stressful deals and complicated emotions, as though that gave him a license to betray her. Sometimes I feel trapped. Our life, it got so big, so fast. I never wanted to hurt you." But Angela's eyes, filled with betrayal, told him that any excuse would be hollow. Then came the topic Mark dreaded most. The IRS investigation. Angela slammed a folder onto a nearby coffee table containing the messages and notices she had intercepted from Mark's CFO and legal team. "I'm not a fool, Mark. What's going on with our finances? Are we in danger?" Her voice cracked, revealing not just anger, but a profound fear for the baby's future. Mark went pale. Faced with no way out, Mark finally admitted pieces of the truth, that the IRS was scrutinizing his accounts and that Caldwell was under investigation. He glossed over the details, claiming it was merely a routine check, but Angela knew better. She told him about the phone call from Kara Hoffman, the anxiety in the finance department, the hush-hush rumors swirling in business circles. Mark's casual dismissal of the audit set her on edge. She could see the worry etched in his eyes, belying his false assurances. In that painful moment, Angela realized they were standing on the precipice of something far larger than infidelity. They were at risk of losing their home, their reputations, possibly even their freedom if Mark's dealings were truly illegal. A swirl of confusion overtook her. How could the man she loved, who once saved every penny to buy her a modest engagement ring, have drifted so far into moral bankruptcy, summoning what strength she had? Left, Angela delivered an ultimatum. Either you end this affair, cooperate fully with the investigation, and prove you can be a father, or I'll leave. I won't stand by and let you drag me and our child down with you. Her tone was firm, a quiet declaration that shattered Mark's self-serving illusions. For the first time, he saw in Angela a strength more formidable than he had ever imagined. He stuttered, pleading with her to let him make it. Right, insisting that Cassie meant nothing, that he'd handle the IRS. But Angela stared at him, tears still streaming. She gave him one last chance, an opportunity to come clean and choose family over his addictive chase for wealth and excitement. Mark stood there, drenched in shame and uncertainty, uncertain if he could muster the courage to confront the monstrous problems he himself had created. The moment Mark set foot in his corner office. The next day, he felt the tension in the air so thick it could be cut with a knife. Several of his junior associates were huddled in the hallway, whispering among themselves. His CFO, Brian Cummings, appeared frazzled eyes, lined with dark circles from working through the night. A handful of boxes, filled with financial documents, stood stacked against the walls, evidence that the office had been combed through thoroughly. No sooner had Mark taken a seat behind his expansive mahogany desk than Mallory Finch, the lead auditor from the IRS, entered the room. She introduced herself politely, but her demeanor carried the authority of someone who had already unearthed serious irregularities. Mark tried to maintain his usual cool composure, but Mallory's questions were pointed. We'll need full access to your ledgers, bank statements, and any documentation related to your offshore accounts, she stated, her voice calm yet unyielding. One by one, Mark's staff delivered files to Mallory and her audit team. The entire office felt like a crime scene, with accountants and lawyers picking through every line item, every receipt and every contract. Mark attempted to project an air of cooperation, hoping that by acting transparent, he might reduce suspicion. Yet behind the facade, panic flared in his chest with each document he signed over. Over the following days, Mallory's team uncovered evidence of large sums of money flowing through shell corporations. Whenever Mark tried to feign ignorance, Mallory presented him with email correspondences or suspicious wire transfer confirmations bearing his digital signature. In meeting after meeting, Mark struggled to explain the labyrinthine structure of his business dealings. He found himself stumbling over the complexities, some of which Caldwell had orchestrated. Meanwhile, Caldwell was conspicuously absent. Phone calls to him went straight to voicemail, and cryptic text messages offered no real support. Mark finally reached Caldwell's lawyer, only to be informed that Caldwell was unavailable and that Mark should speak to his own legal counsel. Though Mark's official stance remained that he and Caldwell were partners, Caldwell had begun insulating himself from the fallout. Cassie, too, seemed suddenly distant. She had been helpful before, but once the audit gained momentum, she avoided dropping by the office or appearing with Mark publicly. She insisted it was best to keep a low profile until the situation blew over. Privately, Cassie was assessing whether Mark was worth sticking around for, or if she should jump ship to protect her burgeoning career. The glow of their sun-drenched vacations felt like a lifetime ago. Now every conversation crackled with tension. Amid the chaos, Angela received a flurry of calls from Mark's lawyers, advising her to limit any public statements or social media posts that might affect the ongoing investigation. Though she had no intention of speaking publicly, she understood the subtext. They feared she might vent her frustrations, potentially exposing more of Mark's secrets. She responded politely, but remained on guard, reluctant to trust anyone paid by Mark's questionable fortunes. But for Angela, the real challenge was emotional. She felt paralyzed, uncertain whether to believe Mark's repeated assertions that he was handling it. With each day, her baby grew inside her, a silent testament to the gravity of the life choices swirling around her. She was torn between anger, heartbreak, and the faint hope that Mark could somehow rectify the damage he'd wrought. As the audit wore on, Mark's worst fears materialized. His personal finances, those he had guarded most fiercely, were now under scrutiny. Mallory's team discovered that some of his lavish personal expenses were siphoned directly from corporate accounts. Worse, there was evidence of tax fraud, with Mark claiming deductions for luxury trips that in reality had nothing to do with legitimate business. It was the perfect storm for a case that could escalate beyond simple fines into criminal charges. In a tense meeting late one evening, Mark's legal counsel laid everything on the table. If you don't fully cooperate and provide any remaining documents, the IRS may pursue charges. You could face prison time, Mark reeled. Jail had never been part of his wildest calculations. He had assumed that being wealthy and well-connected would insulate him from serious legal consequences. Now that protective veil was disintegrating, needing a lifeline. Mark attempted to reach out to Caldwell one last time. To his shock, Caldwell's phone was answered by a cold, automated voice announcing the number had been disconnected. A follow-up call to Caldwell's office revealed that the mogul was allegedly overseas for an extended period. Mark cursed under his breath, realizing he had been left to fend for himself in a lion's den. The man who had once toasted to their partnership was now vanishing like smoke. That night, Mark sat alone in his office, the city lights glimmering through floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off the scattered paperwork that spelled doom for his financial empire. He considered calling Cassie to vent or beg for comfort, but the prospect of another hollow reassurance made his stomach churn. As he stared at the final remnants of his once grandiose aspirations, a pang of regret rattled him. He had traded his wife's love and his family's future for fleeting thrills and illusions of grandeur. Now the audit threatened to expose every lie he'd told to Angela, to the world, and most damningly to himself. In the days that followed, the audit expanded, touching not only Mark's direct holdings, but also affiliated partnerships. News leaked, leading to sensational headlines. Millionaire entrepreneur under IRS probe, high-flying lifestyle meets harsh reality, and partner of Richard Caldwell, questioned in major tax evasion case. Journalists began digging into Mark's background, painting him as the poster child for new money gone awry. Every flashy social media post he'd made with Cassie became tabloid fodder. The images relabeled as evidence of possible embezzlement. His office phone rang incessantly with calls from investors, business associates, and even distant relatives who wanted their slice of the truth or an explanation of how he'd tarnished the family name. Mark's PR team scrambled to contain the fallout, spinning statements about how he was fully cooperating with authorities. But the tone was grim, and the public consensus leaned toward condemnation. People love a success story, but they find an equal or perhaps greater thrill in watching a figure stumble, especially one who had reveled in ostentatious displays of wealth. Cassie Delgado, once an ever-present source of excitement, showed up unannounced at Mark's office one evening. Her eyes darted nervously around the reception area, where agents and lawyers were busily poring over boxes of files. She slipped into Mark's private suite, shutting the door behind her with a soft click. Mark, physically and emotionally drained, looked up surprised and guarded. She spoke in a hushed tone, a tremor in her voice, betraying the panic beneath her practiced composure. "Mark, this is getting out of hand. The IRS could start looking into every transaction I handled for you. My name is on some of those marketing contracts. If they think I'm part of this..." She left the threat unspoken. Mark stared at her, half annoyed, half sympathetic. He realized she had never planned to be caught in a legal quagmire. Her loyalty was as transactional as any of his offshore ventures. In a bid to reassure her, Mark promised that her name would remain clear, insisting she hadn't knowingly committed any crimes. She demanded to see documents, emails, receipts, anything to confirm she wouldn't be implicated. Reluctantly, Mark allowed her a glimpse into some sanitized versions of his accounts. Yet the tension between them was palpable. The illusions of a carefree relationship disintegrated under the weight of potential indictments. Cassie left the office with no promise of a future rendezvous. Meanwhile, Angela found herself navigating a different battleground. Mark's lawyers pressed her to sign documents that would shield certain assets under her name, presumably to separate them from Mark's precarious financial entanglements. Confused and wary, Angela enlisted a lawyer of her own. She wasn't about to let Mark's shady dealings ruin her credit or her standing, especially with a baby on the way. "Protect yourself," her lawyer advised. "You don't want to be tied to anything that could be seized if this goes south." At night, Angela wrestled with a storm of emotions. She was furious with Mark for placing her in such a precarious position, but also worried about the father of her child, potentially facing prison. Her moral dilemma festered. Should she stand by him in hopes that he'd transform back into the man she once loved? Or should she cut ties, safeguarding herself and her baby from the inevitable destruction amid this maelstrom? Mark's friend-turned-mentor, Richard Caldwell, maintained an enigmatic distance. Whispers circulated that Caldwell had fled to a non-extradition country or was in the process of shifting assets to offshore havens. A single short letter from Caldwell's legal team arrived at Mark's office, disclaiming any responsibility for Mark's financial decisions. It stated, Caldwell was prepared to cooperate with authorities if he was subpoenaed. Mark felt a chill at the underlying threat Caldwell might cut a deal that implicated him in exchange for leniency. In desperation, Mark tried to salvage at least one partnership. He invited one of his key investors, Michael Evans, a man he once considered a friend, to dinner at an upscale restaurant. The objective was to reassure Evans that the business still had potential, that Mark's personal troubles wouldn't sink their joint ventures. But over the flicker of candlelight, Evans drummed his fingers on the table and coldly remarked, "I invested in your vision. Mark, not in your vanity. Now it seems all you cared about was flaunting money you didn't even have." The meal ended early with Evans walking away, refusing to share even a parting handshake. Humiliation sank heavily into Mark's gut doors that once opened for him. Private clubs, elite investment groups were swiftly closing. Rumors and half-truths spread. People who had lauded him for his risk-taking brilliance now labeled him reckless or even criminally negligent. Each day felt like a war of attrition on his spirit, culminating in the knowledge that he had orchestrated his own downfall. In a final desperate effort, Mark turned to Angela, swallowing his pride. He arrived at the mansion late one evening, drenched by a sudden rainstorm, and found her in the living room, reading pregnancy guides by the flickering fire. Collapsing to his knees beside her, Mark pleaded for her forgiveness, promising to set everything right. He vowed to cut ties with Cassie and even threatened legal action against Caldwell, swearing he would devote himself to her and their unborn child if she would just stand by him through the audit. Angela listened with weary eyes. She wanted to believe him, yearned for the possibility of redemption. But trust is not an infinite resource. However profound her love might have been, it was battered and fragile now. "Mark," she whispered, voice trembling. "I need more than promises. I need a reason to believe you'll truly change for once." Mark had no clever comeback, no glib assurance. He simply held Angela's hands in his own, the silent tears mixing with the rainwater dripping from his hair. Yet in her mind, Angela couldn't shake the image of him, carefree on some exotic beach, while her tears stained the floors of an empty home. Whether he was truly remorseful or just desperate to avoid utter collapse, she couldn't quite discern. The inevitable moment came one crisp autumn morning. Mark received a summons detailing the IRS's intent to pursue charges of tax fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to evade taxes. Although formal indictments had not yet been filed, the document spelled out enough to shake Mark to his core. If convicted, he could face hefty fines and potentially years behind bars. News outlets pounced on the story, fueling public outrage over Mark's ostentatious lifestyle at the expense of unpaid taxes and possible illegal gains. Overnight, he became a pariah. The viral hashtag #RutherfordQuaReckoning trended across social media, accompanied by pictures from his once vaunted Instagram feed. Memes ridiculed him as a cautionary tale of greed and moral decay. As the IRS case progressed, Mark's lawyers advised him to seek a plea deal, something that might reduce jail time if he cooperated fully and revealed any co-conspirators. Mark balked at first. The mere idea of turning on Caldwell felt like a betrayal. But Caldwell had already disappeared from Mark's life, leaving a trail of plausible deniability. There was no loyalty to preserve anymore. In a tense meeting with his legal team, Mark agreed to provide detailed accounts of his transactions with Caldwell and the shady practices they had employed to mask income. It was a desperate act, akin to dragging others into the fire to lessen his own burns. Mark felt equal parts anger and shame. His once proud confidence had eroded, leaving behind a man grasping for any lifeline. Meanwhile, Angela watched from the sidelines, sickened and heartbroken. She was summoned as well, though primarily as a witness. Her name was on certain joint bank accounts. Her baby bump had grown. Each kick reminded her of the new life she was trying to protect. She prepared herself to testify, truthfully determined not to lie for Mark. If he had ever truly loved her, he wouldn't force her into the role of accomplice. Cassie Delgado, too, was called for questioning. While her official work for Mark's firm was deemed legitimate, investigators wanted to ensure she wasn't complicit in any financial crimes. Terrified of criminal charges, Cassie painted herself as merely an employee, someone who had no role in Mark's financial decisions. She cooperated, answering every question about Mark's whereabouts, his corporate spending, and how business expenses often appeared suspiciously personal in nature. With her personal involvement clarified, Cassie walked away unscathed, albeit her reputation irreparably tarnished. The final blow to Mark's empire came with a court-ordered freeze on many of his assets. His mansion went into foreclosure, luxury cars were repossessed, and his bank accounts were seized, pending further legal proceedings. One by one, employees in his companies were laid off, fueling bitter resentment from families who relied on those paychecks. Mark couldn't meet payroll or vendor obligations. He watched helplessly as everything he'd built, the offices, the brand, the illusions, crumbled. Angela made the difficult decision to move out of the mansion before the bank officially reclaimed it. She refused Mark's tearful requests to stay by his side, insisting they needed space to reflect. She settled temporarily in a modest apartment near her parents, choosing to focus on her well-being and the baby's imminent arrival. Her lawyer had successfully shielded her personal finances, ensuring she wouldn't be dragged into Mark's legal vortex. On the day Mark finally accepted the plea agreement, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, cameras flashed. As he walked in, his hair unkempt, dark circles under his eyes. The same man who once strutted in designer suits now wore a resigned expression and an off-the-rack outfit. In front of a judge, he spoke words he never envisioned uttering. "I plead guilty, Your Honor." The plea involved cooperating with ongoing investigations into Caldwell's network, offering testimony regarding their underhanded financial schemes. Though prison time was nearly certain, it might be lessened due to his cooperation. Standing in that courtroom, Mark felt a nauseating swirl of regret. He flashed back to simpler times, when a faithful wife, a small apartment, and a dream for a better life had been enough. How far he had strayed. Walking out to a chorus of shouted questions from journalists, Mark said nothing. His lawyer shielded him, guiding him into a waiting car. As they pulled away, he glimpsed a billboard on a nearby building. It displayed a gleaming tropical scene, with a couple laughing on a beach, a seductive advertisement for holiday packages. He closed his eyes, remembering his social media posts with Cassie under exactly such a sun. The irony was as bitter as the metallic taste of fear and regret on his tongue. In the ensuing weeks, Mark prepared for sentencing. The judge would weigh his cooperation against the severity of his crimes. He resided in a small, barren apartment, a far cry from his former luxury. The silence at night was deafening, and sleep evaded him. He alternated between making calls to his remaining legal counsel and drafting letters of apology to employees, to business partners, and most painfully to Angela. While Mark grappled with his new reality, Angela focused on hers. She continued prenatal checkups, often accompanied by her supportive mother. Away from the oppressive gloom of Mark's downfall, Angela found moments of calm, even happiness. She set up a simple nursery in her parents' home, painting the walls a gentle shade of yellow. As she folded tiny baby clothes, she felt a blend of apprehension and resolve. The future was uncertain, but she would not let Mark's mistakes define her child's life. As Mark approached his sentencing date, he met again with Mallory Finch, the steadfast IRS auditor who had spearheaded the case. Despite her unwavering professionalism, Mallory sensed the tragic undertones of Mark's journey. She had encountered dozens of wealthy individuals who believed themselves untouchable, but Mark's downfall seemed particularly steep. When Mark thanked her, an odd moment of gratitude to the person who had effectively unraveled his life, Mallory simply responded, "I hope this leads you to a better path." On a chilly winter afternoon, Angela went into labor, surrounded by her mother, her sister, and a compassionate medical staff. She brought a healthy baby boy into the world. She named him Daniel, honoring her grandfather. As she held her son for the first time, tears rolled down her cheeks. This was a new beginning, fragile, beautiful, and untainted by the sins of the father. Mark, informed by letter, received the news in his prison cell. He felt a pang of both joy and sorrow, imagining the life he could have shared with them, if only he hadn't succumbed to greed and self-indulgence. Restricted by concrete walls and razor wire, he could only dream of a day he might hold his child. He resolved that if he ever got the chance, he would be a better man. This real-life drama story of grandiose wealth, crushing betrayal, and hard-earned redemption reminds us that no amount of luxury can outweigh the value of loyalty and honesty. Mark Rutherford's rise and fall, echo a stark warning beneath every glittering facade. Lie choices that can shatter families and futures if we allow greed to eclipse our moral compass. Angela's journey underlines the power of inner strength. By choosing integrity over complicity, she protected not just herself, but the next generation. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this gripping saga.